All right. This ride with emergency practitioner Dr. Cowles was very interesting.
Yeah, a lot of wealth of experience. A real kind, gentle soul, generous with his perspective and information, and got a good sense of humor too. So it's a fun ride. It's a little bit of a research project. A lot of interesting concepts discussed, but not everything is about daredevil stunts on mopeds. So definitely worth a listen. And stick around to the end when we talk about the controversial subject of COVID.
Yeah, that I thought was very interesting. I think, like most academic people who are in that realm of doctorate, you ask a simple question and you get a textbook answer. Just goes on. And I personally, because I know a bit of your life, of course, and where you were asking these questions from, and to hear his answers was very insightful for me. And
Got it.
if we were
Well,
going to say anything to people, if you only have 10 seconds left, get out and walk. So yeah, anything else?
get out and walk after you've subscribed and donated to Blast and Compton Cowboys. And just be yourself. Everybody else is taken.
Sis, hallo?
Blijven.
Bist du sicher wegen dem?
Yo iets niet, joh.
Two outlaws on the lam, taking the back roads through America.
You can't drink enough coffee for this show.
And now it's time for Monday Madness with the Moped Outlaws, Greg and Mark.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Moped Outlaws. We are in for a great ride. Today's guest is Dana Cowles. He is someone who has a lot of experience with medical profession, and he runs Cowles Emergency Services. Welcome, Dana.
Well, thank
Cowles.
you. Thanks.
Dana Cowles. That W, man, I have one in my name. They can get to be problems, but just so you all know, it's Dana Cowles. Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, I say that the COWL is like BOWL, so if you're mispronouncing it, I don't want to have breakfast with you.
So it should go now. I've already screwed up his name. We should be relaxed and everything should go smoothly from this point on out. So what part of the world are you in, Dana?
Currently Orlando, but I actually just flew in from New York about 10 minutes ago. So it's been a little bit of a hectic day. Going through the weather changes is really fun.
Are you there for vacation?
Orlando's home for me.
Oh, wow.
I'm actually been doing a travel contract over the past few years up in central New York. So we staff various emergency departments that might be understaffed or, they might be having a little issue with the contract or whatever, but, we help out where we can.
I'm familiar with traveling nursing and traveling doctor programs because of my closeness to a healthcare employee. But for those of us who don't understand that, explain what that means a little bit and a little bit about Cowles Emergency Services.
Well, you might not understand, but the typical hospital doesn't employ physicians directly. So they will generally be contracted through an independent group. And back in the day, most of the groups were very independent democratic groups that just functioned by themselves. And in the Orlando area, I'm still employed with one of them. They maintain and run their own structure, and they can, do a lot of flexibility with what they're doing. And then there's what they call corporate medical groups or CMGs. And these are more of a structured group that can be nationwide. They might be local or they might be nationwide. And I work with Team Health. That's a nationwide contract. So they staff a lot of the hospitals all over the country. And so if there's one hospital that might be a little more rural or have issues staffing because of that. So if you're in a smaller town, a little more remote, then there's not a plethora of board certified emergency physicians that live right within a 30-minute radius. So, they'll try to contract people out from further out, or they might bring people in from other parts of the country to help out for a short time until they are able to recruit more local.
So I didn't realize it sounds like emergency is a specialty, just like pediatrics or gerontology.
Absolutely. So
Makes
back in
sense.
the 1970s into the 80s, most of the emergency departments would staff an independent physician that might have been a surgeon or a primary care doctor. And then they started to focus on more technology and procedures, and we were able to assist in a lot more cases and be a lot more effective. And it became its own specialty in its own right. And so now you can do your residency training specifically in that, which I did, and become board certified in specifically emergency medicine. So I don't hold an independent office for myself, but Cowles Emergency Services do more outside of the hospital as well, where I do public speaking. I can do case reviews for medical malpractice, those things. So, it's kind of a more encompassing branch of the.
And do you book and handle other physicians in their roles, or is it built around you as an individual?
It's me as an individual, because in my practice in the hospitals, that's run through Team Health, or, one of the other groups that I work with is Emergency Physicians of Central Florida. And that's the more private independent group. But Team Health, and I've worked with Envision before, those are the corporate groups that go nationwide.
So having that business entity set up that way helps you to be ease into their system and their way of billing.
Yeah.
Got it. What do you love about being an emergency services physician?
It was an interesting pathway of getting there. And I started in EMS in Queens, New York. And I was at a point where I wanted to do anything else, and so I was looking for the pathway in the right field for me, because once you focus on residency training and you specialize or even subspecialize, you're really honing a narrow niche to focus on for the rest of your career. And for physicians, it's a little more complicated to just kind of go between others, so the way you look at things in life, or even the way you look at things in medicine, are very different, and the expectations are different. So the expectations of an emergency room physician are much different than the expectations for a family physician or an OBGYN. And so when I was looking at the different ways to help, let's say you're an OBGYN, you're helping to deliver babies, you're asking, do I want to be there for the best day of people's lives? Where in emergency medicine, you're going to be there for the worst day of their life. And I generally have not been good at having a long-term conversation to tell the same person to stop smoking and drinking and eat better, exercise better, do those kind of things over and over again, and so for me in emergency medicine, I can tell you, listen, I don't know what's going to happen for your life. I don't know how things are going to turn out in the end run, but I can tell you, you're not going to die today. And for me, that's a very powerful thing, that when you're effective in your role, it is very enlifting and empowering, both for me and the patients and their families.
Got it. That must be a very emotionally taxing kind of role. What do you do to manage the stress and maintain a healthy self-care regimen for yourself to deal with the environment that you work in?
Well, once I find it, I'll let you know. That's
Got
I
it.
smoke and drink and eat junk food.
So, compartmentalization is very important, as is expectations. And so you do have to maintain boundaries for yourself to take care of your own health, and that can get overlooked. And one of the things that I've found for physicians in particular is this concept of love, where love itself is putting someone else ahead of yourself. So if you say, I love a spouse, a family member, even a friend, you're basically saying, I'm going to put your needs above my own. And that tends to be the case for physicians in general. And I find that in almost everyone that I've worked with. And I've been very proud to call them colleagues because of that. But they will put other people's needs ahead of their own. And when you do that over a long period of time, if you're not setting the boundaries, it's easy to neglect a lot of what you need to in life, a lot of what you need to take care of. And so you need to focus on those things, and to have expectations of what you need during a particular shift is to make sure that, you know, you're eating, or you're going to the bathroom, or you're taking a little mental break, or, you know, being able to do those things. But you also have to be flexible in your expectations, you know. And I have actually found for myself, which is not the same for other people, but if I work longer strings of shifts, it's easier for me because it's almost like I'm in a rhythm and a zone. So to just work like a day or two and then take a day or two off is for me like stutter stepping. I equate it a lot to like when you have to shovel snow, you know, and you get out there, you're putting in the work, you're getting hot and sweaty, but you're cold, you're wet. And then you take a break, you come in, you get all the wet clothes off, you get more comfortable, right? Then you go put the clothes back on to finish up the job. I'm like, I'd rather just get the job done and, you know.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you compartmentalize, and you found for yourself that you're a marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely.
And so that implies that there's marathons of private time, or time that you get to take to yourself. What do you love to do when you're not working?
Well, that's changed quite a bit over time. So, you know, my first priority is always going to be to my family, you know, so they get the lion's share of any of the free time that I have off. And, you know, my wife's a very busy professional as well. My kids are in school, and it makes it kind of interesting, and why the travel for me has actually been better, because I don't do well with monotony. I don't sit calmly, and it's hard to kind of adjust between a high pace, fast moving, constant thinking and constant decision making to just kind of shut it off and sit at a beach. You know, that's not something that. And somebody actually told me before, you know, you need to find tranquility. And I was like, what a great word, you know. I just, I need to find that, I guess. But I've done quite a bit in my life where, you know, I like to travel, and I'm an adrenaline junkie. And so, you know, I've got my pilot's license. I like to be able to do that, although it's been years since I've been up in a plane. And then I'm a poker player. You know, I like to do that. I was just talking about getting back into a tournament next week, you know, seeing about doing that. But, you know, I played in the world stage a little bit. So I made it to a final table of a World Poker Tour. And, you know, I played in the World Series main event 4 or 5 times now. So. You know.
What do you like? I mean, what I notice about Hold'em is that I love the mathematics of it, because I'm familiar, and I've gotten to the point in my game where I'm pretty good at reading the table math.
Okay.
But it becomes the personality part to understand betting strategies and various things like that. How does being an emergency services physician help you in reading your opponents on the poker table?
So let me give you a scenario where you go into a poker game and you're going to have a very brief interaction. Somebody's going to tell you they got the worst thing in the world, you know, and you have to ascertain, one, are they being truthful? Two, how much time, energy, and resources am I going to put into this? You know, and so I laugh about it a little bit because there's so much correlation. It's crazy. Yeah. You know, and when you're doing this resource management as well, you're going to have your ups, your downs, you're going to go higher, you're going to go lower, and you just got to make sure the lows don't hit the ground, you know? So I learned a lot through Chris Voss, if you're familiar with him.
Yep. Never Split the Difference is an amazing book. I use it a lot.
Exactly. I actually just did a show with him recently. He's a phenomenal guy, and he pointed out that people lie only. Well, people tell the truth only one way, and they lie thousands of ways.
Hmm.
And so what you need to do first is find out how people are telling the truth, and then if they're deviating that from that, there's deception. And so I've employed that quite a bit as well, because and that's why, like, in a polygraph test, they always do the baseline first. How how do you answer a truthful question, and then they can look for deviations beyond that.
So does that mean
But
you use conversational techniques before you get in the game with the other players to try
I
to get it
yeah, I do it all throughout. I'm not
all
a big
throughout?
fan of this staring straight forward, and I'm always a person that I'll run my mouth and it won't change based on the hand or anything like that. I tell stories. One of the things that I did do with people on the table is hand histories. Everybody wants to talk about a hand history. So when I give hand histories, I tell about how a guy blew his hand apart with a firework, or there was this guy who had a fixation rod with, and somebody else with carpal tunnel. I'll give a hand history. So,
But that's when you say hand history in the poker environment, they're talking about a different thing, right?
right, they're talking about some story where I had these two cards, and then
Right.
these cards came out, and we bet this way, and they always make it into this dramatic war story.
Right,
So
which they're also delivering strategic lies in the story to try and get people to think they can read them, right?
yeah, and if you ever notice when you talk to people in the poker world, they're always a victim in the story. They never come out and were like, "Oh, this is what happened, and I was such a hero." It's always a bad beat story.
Hmm.
They never start
Those are
out
the
with,
most painfully memorable, right? Those
yeah,
are the right?
I got these two cards and I just crushed.
Had pair of twos.
Yeah.
So I noticed, Greg, that I have all the questions, and that's okay for now. I'm going to shift gears away from poker. The other thing that came up for me was I watched The Pit. I've got this awareness that in the gangster rap community, there's so many stories of men getting shot multiple times and surviving. And I want to talk a little bit about why people who get multiple gunshots survive in the emergency room setting. What is it about the typical gunshot situation that's survivable?
Well,
That is an obscure question.
what you need to understand about a gunshot is that it's not a magical weapon. It's not like, you kind of do a ping ping and then the person just drops. And what you see on TV is not reality. It's when you see somebody that's like blown back, or lifted off their feet when they're shot, that doesn't happen. And when you have the idea that somebody just drops because they got shot, they just collapse immediately, that's also not real life. And so it depends on what's hit. It depends on the size and caliber of the gun and how far away it was. It depends on, there's a lot of dynamics of a gunshot that can do damage. And so, people will think that it's just a linear tract. And again, that linear tract also depends on what it hits, right? So, did you hit a vital structure? Did you hit a major blood vessel? Did you hit a major organ? And those kind of things can cause a lot of damage right away. But also when you shoot a bullet, especially from distance, it starts to kind of tumble. It doesn't just go like a straight projectile. It'll kind of rotate and tumble a little bit. And so if it hits you doing that, it's going to make a much bigger wound. But it's hot metal that's spinning very fast and traveling very fast, and it cauterizes. Saw my first gunshot wound, that was the first thing I did is look, because he was shot in the leg, and I was like, where's all the blood? I was expecting like somebody would be laying on the floor in a pool of blood, not having someone walking around with no bleeding whatsoever, that they just wrap a little gauze wrap around it and take him to the hospital. you know,
Right, and that's because the heat of the projectile cauterized the wound, and no major vessels were hit.
yeah. And, you know, there's been people that have been shot upwards of 30 times, you know, that, and you can ask somebody, you know, why on earth would you shoot somebody 30 times? And this is, you know, it can be a police scenario or whatever. And if somebody's charging, they're always going to take the idea that if you need to use lethal force, you're going to use lethal force, you know, and so they're not counting shots or bullets at that point, you know, and they will just eliminate the target until the target is eliminated, right? And so, you know, if you're having somebody that's charging you or holding a gun, and let's say you have 5 people around, each of them take a shot, right? That's 5 right off the bat. Second shot, you're up to 10 pretty quick, you know. And what if that person is still standing and still holding the gun, still charging at you, still, you know, put that one that happened recently, that, you know, the woman's still pushing the car forward or whatever, you know, like, so it's not just, okay, I pulled the trigger and then they just collapse and that's the end of the story, you know. And even
well, learned from a guest a few weeks ago that there's also a neurological element that when you fire a firearm, your frontal lobe kind of shuts off. So a lot of officers have thought, yeah, I fired once or twice, and they'll have an empty chamber because their mind just shut off.
well, and that'll be adrenaline as well, you know. So the adrenaline will slow everything down for you and kind of distort things, and, you know, you can have various perceptions of what's going on, you know. But even in some of the most serious wounds, you know, everything in the body is about protection of the brain. So you'll have shunting of blood vessels and things like that that happen that will divert blood from one parts of the body to the brain and protect the brain. And even if somebody is shot in the head, you know, it's going to be because of bleeding, swelling, and things like that that will cause the ultimate death, right? And that doesn't happen immediately, you know. And so somebody could shoot themselves in the head and still be breathing, you know, still have a heartbeat, still, you know, and it could be anywhere from seconds, minutes, depending on the devastation of the injury, to even hours, you know, before the person dies. Now, they're not necessarily conscious during that time. And even in head injuries, you'll see that based on the swelling that happens and or the bleeding, right, you'll have this cognitive decline where you can have somebody actually talking to you and then they just kind of dissipate, you know, like they'll start slurring their speech or becoming really confused and then might lose consciousness, and, you know, their respiratory rate will really slow down, their heart rate will eventually slow down, you know, and it is that like systematic shutdown or decompensation that happens. And that's based on the nerves that are pressed on the base of the spinal cord or just the position in the brain that the injury happened. But there is generally a rule of thumb. There's a Faulk's line that divides your brain into 2 hemispheres. And if you don't cross that, the chances of surviving a head wound are significantly higher.
Got it. So we've all heard crazy stories about things that happen in orifices in the ER, and I'm sure you have some of those, right?
Let's not go there, please. Please. I have a wait, hold on here.
Hold on, Greg. I'm just asking if he has experience in that arena. I'm not asking for specifics, right? It is a true thing.
And I'll tell you this, that one of the best ideas I had heard was, you know, a white elephant Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you do the initial gift giving and then the second person
can steal.
Yeah, will go steal or take a new one. And we were to do that in an emergency department like staff environment where the presents have to be a replica of things that were removed from a human body.
Oh, that is horrible. That just leaves too much to the imagination. I'm wondering, it seems like there's an element, just generally speaking, in the medical field where the priority is to sustain life. It's not the quality of the life. So you get doctors who, it's like, hey, we kept you alive, even though that person's quality of life is almost non-existent. And I'm wondering, from a philosophical standpoint, what your personal view of that is.
So I'm going to qualify this answer because it's very case specific in those. And that's something that's always on the foremind. And I try to make sure that there's as many people involved in the decision-making process as possible. So when somebody has a DNR order, a living will or proxy, and maybe their quality of life didn't start out well, we try to make sure that their individual wishes are the number one that's honored. So in a do not resuscitate order, that we're saying we're not going to do aggressive means like electrical shock or a code with compressions and drugs and things like that. It has to be relying on what the person themselves would have wanted, right? So I try to tell family members, doesn't matter what you want, doesn't matter what I want, matters most what they would want. And the quality of life is a very difficult thing to judge in an emergency setting, and so you have to understand that we're very big problem solvers. And so we want to solve a problem. It's a challenge. Running a code is like having the challenge in front of you that is sometimes the insurmountable, right, hill to climb, but you want to make sure that you're giving your best effort at running that. And so every emergency room physician is going to give their all in trying to do that. But we don't want to exceed what's appropriate or what people would want us to do. And so we try to make that as clear as possible right up front. And that's even a question that we'll generally ask for people that are just getting admitted to the hospital, just so that we know. And we're not making the decision without family members around. God forbid something changes quickly. We'll try to ask when they get admitted to the hospital so that we know. But one of the best things that I ever heard from one of my attendings in residency is he said, Dana, your job is to save lives, but you have no right whatsoever to prolong someone's death. And so we will keep that into account. But how do you make the overall guesstimation of what that quality of life is going to look like down the road, right? And so a lot of these things are very sudden changes, and they can be catastrophic. But if you're resuscitating appropriately, the outcome might be great, and it might be detrimental. And it's really hard to tell right in that moment. So sometimes you've got kind of the fog of war type thing that has to let the dust settle over a few days, a few weeks. I actually had somebody that told me a couple of days ago that he had a family member who they thought had an abdominal issue, and it turned out that they had a major cancer issue, and they didn't know it. Like, this was the first time this was discovered, and they were so sick when they came to the hospital, where they thought they were just going to pick them up in a short term and bring them back home. It turned out that they needed major resuscitative care and put on life support, and then declined over a period of time and ended up passing away. And that didn't afford any time to really say goodbye or interact or those kind of things, in that time frame. So that can be really hard to do. And we were actually asking that exact question. We use sedative medications when somebody's on life support so that it's not uncomfortable for them. We make sure that it's something that sedates enough that they're not aware of what's going on, and also will have no memory of the event if and when they wake up. And would you take that medication off long enough for somebody to say goodbye, or to ascertain right then where their mental capacity might be, in making that decision? Because we are kind of fighting against the body at the time, right? Like we're trying to get the things in the body straight so that they're not having whatever fatal problem or whatever is causing them to be super sick. And so sometimes in trying to tackle that equation, the mental side or psychological side kind of goes by the wayside, right? You know, I mean, because we're focusing on the body first and foremost.
Do you
And so it's an
find
interesting.
do you find that hospice and maybe even perhaps religious leaders are allies in your work because they bring in this cognitive aspect where you might be really fighting, as you say, in the fog of war with very physical elements.
Yeah,
And here's some allies in the environment to kind of bring reminders of this ethereal aspect.
100%. But sometimes, you know, hospice isn't going to be very effective in a short term, like, you know, within hours or days, you know, but over a longer period of time, for sure. I am a huge proponent of hospice, always have been. And I try to tell my patients that if you're entertaining hospice, a lot of people will think that's me giving up. You know, they'll say things like, well, I'm not ready for them to die. My outlook on it is hospice provides options. It's not about, you know, dying is kind of this part of what they do. And everybody misses out on a lot of the stuff that they do, you know. And so this is a real life question, right? I look at it as, ask yourself realistically, do you believe today is the best day of the rest of your life? And if the answer to that is a legitimate yes, I think you need to be getting hospice involved, right? Like in some form or another. And unfortunately, there's restrictions based on insurances and based on, you know, what other treatments you're engaging. But if I were to make the recommendation to anybody, is if you feel like today is legitimately probably the best day of the rest of your life, maybe your quality of life has been declining, maybe you've had medical problems that are not curable or whatever it is, you can at least have the free conversation with hospice. And they'll go through all their services so that you're aware of it, so that you know it. And you can find out what they provided, what they can do. And then I would highly recommend to ask, what's the light switch, right? So if you tell me I don't qualify for hospice today, great. What's the qualification switch, right? What do I need to see happen that will make me call you back and say, okay, I'm ready?
Do you find that people's fear of death, especially in family members or loved ones, not the individual itself, pollutes your ability to be of service as a medical practitioner?
A lot of times it can, because, you know, I focus on fear and anxiety a lot, have throughout my career. And one of the focuses of it is that fear itself is a tool. And, you know, we've been taught since the main 1800s, when people focused on nervous disorders and they wanted to utilize new medications that had come out. And the idea was, if we've got these great medications that for the first time is better than the snake oils and the tinctures or whatever, why are we living with negative emotions? You know, if it's uncomfortable, we should just get rid of it if we've got a medication that can get rid of it. But the problem is that that does away with the purpose of it, right? And fear and anxiety is something that is there to make sure we slow down and pay attention. And that's even why when you get an adrenaline rush, everything goes in slow motion. Your body is trying to navigate it at that point. And so I try to make sure that people around me that are feeling tense will slow down when they're feeling tense, but I don't want them to run from it. So if someone says to me, hey, Dr. Cowles, I'm terrified to work in the ER, I'm scared, my answer is good. Don't lose that. That's what keeps you on your edge, and that's what keeps you focused on the things that are around you. But you also need to have a plan and a skill set in life. And so if we're doing a DNR, or we're doing, you know, end of life decisions, or even going into medical treatment, it's best to have a plan. The problem with, you know, heightened emotions is that people will not trust the plan. And so they might change their mind right at the last minute, or, somebody has said they wanted to be a DNR for the last 20 years. And all of a sudden they're actively dying, and somebody will say, no, change my mind. Like, do everything. Right. And that's specifically why I focus on, it's not what I want, and it's not what you want. It's what they want. Right. So focus back on what they want. And if what they wanted is, to have natural course take hold, then so be it.
I'm wondering, you're a leader in these very highly packed environments, an emergency room. You're also a father and yourself, and you've just spoken how fear and anxiety are natural states of being. So how is fear and anxiety a tool in your personal life as a leader and a father and a partner?
I've grown up, when I was young, I was petrified of everything. I was just so full of anxiety. I could barely talk to anybody. And it was actually a chore to try to have a conversation. I would quickly back out of a conversation if I thought that wasn't something people wanted to hear, or it was meaningless. And that, because you can overthink things, would make it very awkward. And then you get into these positions in life you don't want to be. Like, I had to ride a train to go to school every day when I was in middle school. So this is like, 12, 13 years old. And of course, there's a group of girls that you're interested in, that you're like, oh, I want to go and talk to them or say hello or be at least mildly charming. Can I come up with a joke, something? No, instead, you're the creepy kid that's just staring at them for like 20 minutes, And I found that wasn't working for me, but I wanted to chase this path of fearlessness as a result of that, because I saw other people in my life or on TV or whatever that were fearless. And I was like, I want to be fearless like that. And so the idea was just charge head forward into everything, right? Like, if it's scaring you, just go do it, right? If you are scared of heights, go throw yourself out of an airplane, right? If you're, and exposure therapy, and that would take care of it all, right? Like, it would make it all better. It makes it worse. Like, you can get terrified and paranoias and stuff like that. And so what I've come to find is that the true fear is not fear itself, right? You've heard that line, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And my outlook on that is, go walk in downtown Jamaica, Queens in 2:00 in the morning and ask yourself if the only thing you have to fear is fear. Or, talk to veterans who have been in war, and ask them if the only thing to fear is fear. The only thing really to fear is helplessness. And what we're actually doing in life is building a skill set against helplessness. And everything you learn how to do, everything you take care of, or any networking that you do, right, is all about alleviating helplessness. So I try to delineate the problems that I have in my life and the things that I do. One of them is I'm not handy at all, right? And it's like, my dad grew up as a dairy farmer, and he was like, it's amazing that if somebody's arm fell off, you could sew it back on. Not a problem in the world. And you put a screwdriver into a screw, and all you do is make a horrible mess and a big problem and things like that. So I always look at it like, delineate the problems that you have in your life, even the what ifs, and have a plan on how you're going to handle it. And it comes down to not just what is the skill set yourself that you're building to be able to handle it, or whose number in your phone are you calling, right? But to just ignore the problem or let it go, it's going to fester. And everything in life comes at a cost, right? You need to learn what the cost is and pay it, or you're going to accrue interest. And if you're not paying the cost, or accruing interest means someone is paying for it for you, and they will eventually get tired and stop, right? So that's how finances work, but also emotions like fear or anxiety, anger, right? If you ever get angry at somebody and you can't deal with it because the time's not right, the environment's not right, you don't want to lose a relationship, So you just bury it down and it's going to accrue interest. And then when you get angry, it's rage. It's an explosion, right? That's the interest that's accrued.
I want to talk about a different subject.
Okay.
And the nature of my question is intentionally controversial. So I'm just calling this out, right? I'm just going
More
to be
so
really
than
upfront.
foreign bodies. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We got
And the reason I'm asking this is because of my own sphere of social interactions. There's still some social hot buttons that occur around this discussion. So I'm going to frame the question broadly and then hope that you can cover as much of that breadth as possible. But
Okay.
looking back on the way that emergency rooms were the ground zero for COVID and the evolution of that virus as a deathly threat to people, it seems to me like we have reached a level where we don't consider it to be so dangerous anymore. People don't actively mask in most environments, and that the way that the original virus acted and the death rates that were a result of that versus the way COVID's propagating now is significant. What's your experience with the evolution of the virus and its lethality? And
Yep.
are we making a mistake by not masking more, or where are we at?
So part of that gets a little politically charged, but the aspect of it is that's how viruses work. And the one point that I can make the most is that watching COVID happen, because it was lethal, was watching the science happen in real time. Okay. And so you are watching the scientists learning in real time how to handle this thing. And the problem is that there is so much looking behind the curtain because of social media. So they're hearing a lot of these internal thoughts out loud, right? So different things that are being put out there as potential options that people want to explore, right? But we don't know if it's going to work, right? It's worked in different scenarios. Is it going to work in this? Okay. So I'll brief this for a couple of things, because I mean, the news propaganda was crazy, right? Like, one of the treatments is high dose vitamin C. And they've been using this for sepsis cases and viral cases and stuff. If you inject vitamin C into a body, the pathophysiology is it breaks it down into a hydrogen peroxide. That hydrogen peroxide then acts as a disinfectant into the bloodstream, you know, in a lower grade or whatever, right? Then you got a president who says, "Oh, I like that disinfectant idea when you inject it in the IV," and everybody's like, "Oh, he said to inject Clorox." No, he didn't. You know, he didn't have the understanding to clarify it in a distinct way, and they were clipping sound bites. But it's not helpful, right? When people are trying to have an actual scientific discussion. So things like hydroxychloroquine and stuff is supposed to. That was initially an arthritis medication that then became a medication to treat malaria, because these people that happen to be taking it are not getting infected, right? And coronavirus has a very similar mechanism of entry into the cells that malaria does. So they're like, would that work? Well, it would as a preventative thing, but you know, they didn't have enough supply for large groups of people, so they were giving it to the sickest people. Well, the horse has already left the gate, and it's not going to work, and it didn't work, you know. So then we had to discard it and say, go on to the next thing. But we didn't have a lot of remedies in the beginning, right? There was supportive care like we do with other viruses, volume support, fluids and anti-inflammatories and things like that. But people were presenting with very low oxygen levels. And it seemed like it was an oxygen black hole. So if we gave more oxygen support, all of a sudden they were, you know, needing more until they completely decompensated on life support and weren't coming off of it or dying. But just like the scenario with the gun, was it a death sentence in the beginning? No, you know. And what was happening though was because people's information, when it first started, you know, they told us that there was this very virulent coronavirus that was coming out. We always knew what coronavirus was for the last 50 plus years. It's a head cold, and we're like, ooh, nasty head cold, here it comes. And that's why if you look on a Lysol bottle, it even says it treats coronavirus, because we've always known about that. But then we're finding out this is a deadly virulent strain that's coming out of it that we haven't seen before. And it's like, okay, well, but that's not news for us. We've been through Ebola, we've been through, various different Zika virus, or, whatever your soup du jour is. So we're very aware of how to do, preventative measures, quarantining, PPE, all those things that became the hot topics that everybody wanted to talk about. Well, it's kind of like, people saying, oh, there's this big problem with a car, and now the mechanic has to use its wrenches, and it's like, well, he always did. We've always known how to do
Yeah,
that.
I'm less interested in the political background because I think we all have access to that. What I'm really looking for is the way that you experience the treatments changing, and along with the evolution of the virus. And where we were then, clearly it was deadly, and people in your position were really struggling to help people. Right. And over time, we've got now a level at which we have preventative care in the form of vaccines. You just mentioned a certain chemical that if people take more of in advance of getting COVID, that tends to make them less susceptible, right?
So they still haven't studied that enough to know for coronavirus. But, and what I was getting at there was that in the beginning, when this started to come out, people were finding out about it and they had symptoms, but we didn't have ability to test, and they were getting a weird lung finding on the chest x-ray. And I'll tell you that my personal belief is it was here a lot longer than people knew about, because we actually had an au pair who came to me probably 8 months before and told me that she was having a trouble breathing and was coughing up blood, and she's like, is that okay? And I'm like, no, not even a little bit. And she was 23 years old at the time, and I'm like, you're a healthy girl. This shouldn't even be happening. And I took her down to the ER and we checked her out and we gave her a little bit of antibiotics because she had a very weird chest x-ray finding, and then it wasn't like distinctly a pneumonia, but it wasn't normal, And so then we went to, we had to take her back to the hospital a little bit later, and she was admitted for like a week, and then she ended up getting better, and I always just kind of tucked it back there, and I was like, that's weird, but when COVID happened and we were getting hit with it a lot, well, there's that lung finding again, and there's that, the presentation was like the exact same, and I was like, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, I have no idea, but I'm like, I've seen this picture before, just not in the scale that it was. And so in the beginning too, like people were getting various degrees of sick. Some were getting super sick, some were getting not sick at all, kind of like they do now, but the problem is everybody was coming into the hospital, right? So like they wanted to get checked, or they wanted to know if it was it. And if I have it, am I going to die? And that's the main question. And so just like we talked about in the gunshot scenario, no, just because you got it doesn't mean you're going to die, right? It's not a given. And so, you're talking a lot of people off the ledge kind of thing, you're like, hey, you're going to be fine. I'm going to tell you to go home and drink some soup. But if you've got an ER that staffs enough to meet 120 people in a day, right? What do you do when that 120 people show up in 3 hours? Maybe 5 of them are like super sick, but you got to get through all those people to be able to know. And then, you have to then, by that time, 5 have become 7, 8, or 10. And also you got the problem that if they're in the waiting room or different places like that and they're not segregating, then they're going to co-infect each other, so there's a lot of things that have to be. So that's why they went to the flattening the curve. Everybody needs to calm down a little bit, stay separate from each other. We'll shut down the businesses because we can't just be overwhelming the services like that. And then what you saw in real time is how the virus matures and how it evolves, right? And so a virus is a very predatory thing, right? It's like a parasite, right? And so if it goes and is just using its host to replicate itself, it's just, you as a person or the virus's breeding ground. There's no more thought and logic to it than that. And so it's utilizing whatever parts of your system it can to replicate itself and to grow. The problem is stronger it is, the quicker it kills the host. right? So you now have people who aren't going out to parties and they're not going out to the ball game. They got super sick. They went right to the hospital. They died, right? That in of itself kills out the very virulent strain of the virus as well, and then the ones that are less, you talk about survival of the fittest. Well, if you want to survive as a virus, you can't be that lethal to your host, right? It would be like an equation of, hey, we as people are destroying our environment with all this pollution or whatever, and we went to nuclear war, and funny enough, there's no people around anymore, right? So the more deadly you are to your environment, the less you're going to stick around. So now you've got the people that were more, the virus that was more gentle with its environment is now propagating more, and so it's become more like the flu. And we went through the different, trials of, are we going to use this medication? Can we even get that medication? Do we want to try this? These guys over in this center are doing it. Do we want to try it? And then they had plasma exchanges. So what they were doing was finding people that had gotten the virus and recovered from it, developed antibodies for themselves, right? And then they could donate blood, which then we could transfer to another person and give them a little bit of immune support. And then it went to the monoclonal antibodies, right? And then the vaccines started coming out, so I'm trying to give this to you as like a just logistic what happened, but it does kind of tie into the politics a little bit. So the one question I will answer for you, that was on everybody's mind is, can I trust this vaccine because it got tested so fast? And a little fun fact here, I guess, if I was actually in the vaccine trial for Moderna, and it was one of those things because I was so nervous going to work every day. And one of the hardest things was, you don't know exactly what this virus is, how contagious it is. And it was hitting these people and these people, but not these people. And normally a virus hits the super young and the super old the most. And it wasn't happening like that, right? Like it was kind of middle age or young adult and those people that were getting hit the worst. And the kids seemed to tolerate it fine. Even the babies, they were like, well, shaking it off, no problem. And so, you don't know that this virus, for whatever reason, is not following the typical patterns. So, at some point you're like, I'm tired of being afraid and I'm tired of going home and pushing my kids away when all they want is a hug. Dad, I want to see you and I want a hug. And you got to like push them away until you delouse in the garage and shower up again and make sure all your clothes are sterilized and everything before you even go anywhere near them. And so, you get to that point where you're like, I swear I'm just going to make out with the next person I know has it so it can just get this over with, right? Because I don't want to live in this kind of fear and anxiety all the time. And so when I was offered the choice to go into this vaccine study, I was like, absolutely, sign me up, right? And in talking with the guy that did this, and I'll tell you why this was so effective, is you have to do a pilot study on a vaccine, which is basically like 1,000, 2,000 people. And this is after animal control. And you have to determine first and foremost that it's not going to hurt anybody, right? So you give it to the 1,000, 2,000 people. And as long as they don't have any bad effects, you can progress forward. Then you do the main trial where you need to have like 20,000 people in it. And mRNA technology has been there for a while, but it didn't have the applicable avenue, like where are you going to apply it to? And so, you got things like Zika virus or whatever. You want to go into a vaccine trial and, test out an unknown vaccine for this Zika virus that you may or may not ever come in contact with and see, one, is it going to hurt you? Or two, is it going to do any benefit if you came in contact with the Zika virus? Well, that takes like 20 years to be able to get like 20,000 people, So they ran the COVID vaccine trials, and the one center was here in Deltona, right outside of Orlando, and they had over 60,000 volunteers. They were having trouble processing people through because there was so many people that wanted to get involved and volunteered to do the trial and everything. That's how it got through so fast. So if anybody asked my opinion about whether the vaccine is like safe or not, I'm going to tell you, 100% it's safe, 100% it got tested the way it was supposed to, and it was because of the community that happened. It was because people came together to solve this problem.
Got it. But my main question was, as someone who's had an experience in the ER that bridges the periods, the level at which we have reacted in 2020 and 2021 was, you just adequately described quite well. And now in 2026, we've got, generally in terms of our culture, we have this thing where COVID's not an issue for people anymore. But I personally know someone whose long COVID has turned into ME/CFS and a whole cascade of other long-term debilitating effects. And that group that I know is adamant that we should be masking at a higher rate than we are in our culture. And I want to know whether your clinical experience bears that out. Are you still seeing COVID as a significant factor in the work that you do?
We still see it as a factor. Right now, currently, I would say flu is a bigger factor. We have sporadic COVID cases. It is very, again, not virulent very much, other than respiratory symptoms and congestion and fever for the young kids. It's noticeable for sure, but I haven't seen anything that's very dangerous lately. When it first started out, we had people we had to admit constantly, and we had people that were dying from it. Other than having significant comorbidities right now, like serious other medical problems, I've not seen anybody detriment from COVID in quite some time. So over the past few years, I would sit there and say that I would not tell people that they would be super concerned. And especially if I do recommend that people get vaccinated. I think that's far more effective than masking or even the isolation. I 100% would triple down on that if they have a lot of other medical problems, but I would be given the same advice with flu and stuff like that. Right. I think for the most part, I don't like focusing on a paranoia way, of sitting there saying we need to kind of isolate ourselves or do that kind of thing. We can't interact in public. There's a lot of things that got changed with COVID that I think need to come back. A standard handshake or a hug, a little fist bump for people, or a high five or something like that. And that all kind of went away because everybody, became paranoid, and appropriately so for when it was, at its height. We needed to do that. But I don't think that, utilizing the masks, and I'm going to tell you personally, based on micron size of coronavirus, to be really effective, you need to have something that is better than an N95, and in the beginning we were using the self respirators and stuff like that to try to really isolate it when we're in full contact with it, because the surgical mask isn't, it's going to be helpful, but it's not definitive. Right. And
Right.
So can stuff get through it? Yeah, it can get through it. Is it better than having nothing? Yes, but with the amount of disease that we have now and how much less it is as far as morbidity and mortality, I would tell you that the masking itself right now, I wouldn't say is significantly necessary. No.
So what's your experience with long COVID though? Like in the ER setting, you're looking at more acute case loads, right? And so long COVID represents a more long-term sort of debilitation cycle.
Yeah,
But you don't see long COVID patients coming in for end of life care, do you?
No. And I don't know that it's hard to say, right? Because, when they were putting statistics together, anybody who had COVID and died, they would say they died because of COVID, right? And so the same kind of thing, if somebody tests positive for COVID at any given time, because we had people who tested, even though they were completely asymptomatic, right? They tested for weeks and months. And this became an issue with like nursing homes and stuff like that. Like you would have them in the hospital. The hospital's overrun and very busy. We need to get these people back to the nursing homes, but they don't want to bring them back to the nursing home until they're testing negative. But they kept testing positive, even though there was no symptoms and they weren't sick at all. And then there's other people that have had symptoms for a long period of time, and even like a little bit of lung scarring or something like that happened, right? And was that the development of their COPD around the same time that, COVID kind of kicked it off? Could be. One thing that we talk about in medicine is that um, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, right? So,
Right.
The two things happen in a similar time frame. Is one responsible for the other? I do not see a lot of people who are testing positive for long periods of time anymore. So most of the people, they're like, oh, I tested positive for COVID a week ago. I retest them, it's negative, right? And again, we've had some people that have had longer symptoms, but uh, whether or not that's directly attributable to COVID versus something else is hard to pinpoint. I would sit there and say if they didn't have it before, it's likely, but I couldn't tell you at what frequency by any means.
All right. Next question is that for me personally, and then for other folks that I've spoken to, C. diff and skin bacteria are statistically more of a significant risk in a hospital environment. Do you agree or disagree?
Then COVID?
COVID? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as far as like C. diff is not necessarily something that you catch, right? I mean, you can, and it's around there. So it can be in stool samples and it can be transferred and stuff like that, right? But it's less likely unless you have an inciting event. So generally speaking, how people are getting C. diff is everybody has it in their body, right? You have C. diff right now, but your immune system keeps it down, and most of your digestive bacteria is competing for the food that you're eating, right? And the digestive bacteria that's digesting the food in the stool is keeping everything at bay. And then you do some high dose antibiotics. You've got somebody admitted in for pneumonia or sepsis or UTI or whatever it might be, and you're given these high dose antibiotics or an IV, wipes out that gut bacteria, because it's not going to be like, oh, I'm only getting rid of the pneumonia. No, it's going to get rid of any bacteria in your body. And the C. diff is more resilient, as far as getting wiped out completely. And then when the digestive bacteria is not around, it takes all the food. So it's going to proliferate. Yeah. A lot faster, right? So that's how you're typically developing the C. diff infection.
It's not exactly apples to apples in terms of my question regarding COVID. What about the skin bacteria? Is it MSRA or M?
So again, MRSA itself is something that everybody has in them, right? So that's on your skin at any given time. It was a North Carolina hospital or something that, they were testing everybody's nasal to see who had MRSA, and like 90% of the people they tested came up positive, and they're like, we can't publish that because they're going to sit there and say we're a dirty hospital or something, but the fact of the matter is everybody's got MRSA. You've got MRSA on your skin at all times, but your skin is the biggest barrier to everything external in the environment. If you suffer a major burn, you're going to lose your skin integrity, and you're going to be very susceptible to infections. Right. Well, if something happens that you lose the turgor in your skin, then bacteria is going to get in there. Right. So again, it's not some mystical, well, I walked around and this bacteria is kind of hanging out, because if that was the case, the staff would get it all the time. But it's usually that, okay, I'm not walking very much, and maybe I've got heart failure or whatever I'm in the hospital for. So my legs swell up because they're all swollen. They're not holding together great. So now you get little gaps in the skin and stuff. So that bacteria that's around, gets in there and proliferates. And all of a sudden you've got yourself a problem, right? And then you have additional issues of people that have very poor blood supply or diabetes or things like that are going to be more susceptible because they can't fight it off very well.
So what I'm seeing is a corollary between COVID, MRSA, C. diff, and potentially other forms of these infection-based life forms, is that the host health level is the key determining factor.
100% all the time.
And so that's the baseline thing, is protect your health, protect yourself, be balanced, gut bacteria, skin cleanliness, cardiovascular health, and then don't worry so much.
Be vigilant. Fear itself is a way to slow down and pay attention. So we need to pay attention to those things, and when you get into an environment that you're rushed, or you feel that sense of helplessness, people will rush through things. and the cognition doesn't go with it. Right. So the more people speed through stressful environments, I sit there and say it's amazing the things that they'll miss and things like that. So you'll, to bring it back to this event that happened last week, right? Over in LaGuardia Airport. And this is what I have actually told people this, that we need to focus on this and really learn from it. I feel so bad for the air traffic controller. I know exactly what he's going through. But the scenario plays out the same all the time, right? So you get stressed with your normal workload on a day-to-day basis, right? And you focus, and you've done it for years. You're good at what you do, but then all of a sudden there's a distractor, an emergency happens that diverts your attention, right? Well, if you still have to focus on the other things that you were already strained in, then you're going to feel an increase in tension. And you've got two options right there. One, you can slow down and pay attention, like I'm advocating, or you could sit there and say, I want you to hurry up and fix that problem, take it off my plate for me so I can get back to the other work that I was doing. That's when the calamities happen, right? So this guy is now saying, can I get clearance across the runway? And he's like, yep, go fix the problem, right? And instead of like, we need to slow down, we need to methodically pay attention to what's going on, could have potentially helped out. And I'm only going based on the recordings that I've heard, but I don't want to make the formal analysis, but the situation I've seen play out in the emergency room all the time. So you're working through your normal environment, everything's happening at a fast pace. All of a sudden an emergency comes in that really focuses your attention. You need to get back to these other people as well. So you kind of want to clear it off quickly, and you'll tend to rush through that. And what I would advocate for is those are the times you need to slow down and pay attention, right? So if people are feeling that fear and anxiety about disease or health or what's happening in the world, you need to kind of be vigilant of things. But when you're feeling that tension, slow it down and get methodical about what you're doing. And to the point that you made is very good. One thing I do really advocate for is be walking till the day you die. If you can at all help it, be ambulatory. People in the hospital would sit there and say, like, they want to get him out of the hospital quickly because, they want the bed for the next person. So somebody's post-operative, they're getting him right out of the bed, and it doesn't have anything to do with money. It doesn't have anything to do with wanting the bed, right? The problem is that the more people are laying, the less active they are. You're not breathing as deep. You're not moving your legs. Your calf muscles, when you walk, squeeze blood supply back to your heart and isn't sitting in your legs and your feet as much, right? So the more sedentary you are, the less circulation that you're going to have, the more stagnant things get. That's where the infections come from. And that's actually where the pneumonia comes from. It's not some super bug that's like, you got this mysterious bug that's hanging out. No, you got somebody that's completely sedentary in bed for long periods of time. And God forbid you have extra tools inside your body. Every foreign body is going to be very susceptible to infection, right? Bacteria wants to grow on it. So if you have an IV in, you have a breathing tube in, you have a chest tube in, you have a catheter in your bladder, any of those things are going to be breeding grounds for infection. So the quicker we're able to get people up and ambulatory and moving, and they've looked at, like, when they're in the hospital, even if we try to get them up and moving around the floor, as active as you can get them with physical therapy and stuff like that, even the most sedentary people will move 10% or less of what they would at home, just to get their own food or go to the bathroom or do whatever. And now they're not doing those things to the same degree. That's where those things happen.
Got it. This has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so grateful for your insights and the clarity you presented them. If our audience wants to interact with you more, what are the kinds of things you're looking for, and how do they access that? Well,
it can be accessed through CowlesEmergencyServices.com. If people have questions or whatever, I field some emails, and I have some other people that look through them as well. But we're going to be starting up some online courses as well, so that's going to be one of the next things coming. I'd like to kind of finish up on a couple of books, so that'll be coming as well. So I would sit there and say, just if anybody is interested, to be vigilant for those kind of things, be supportive of it would be great. And to feel free and reach out about some of these questions. I tend to, outside of the hospital, give less medical advice, of course, but I'm always happy to field the informative questions for sure.
Got it. And when you do complete the book or you have the course offerings ready to go, let us know. We'll come back and have you come back and talk about those.
Oh, I appreciate you for that. Excellent.
So we do have a final question. That's a tradition of ours to wrap up a ride with people. It seems like the appropriate time to ask this final question. So,
All right, Dana, Foo Fighters or Eminem?
Given on the time frame, I definitely say Foo Fighters, but Eminem is a genius. His ability to rhyme and stuff like that and come up with it on the spot is incredible. So always got to give it up to people who have that intellect to be able to do it. And for me, like, listening to rap is a complete art form in of itself. But as far as musical genre, I mean, I grew up in the late 80s to 90s, so I was a Grohl fan for sure.
nice.
Got it. Thank you for that. We will include Cowles Emergency Services in the show notes and any other information that we have on you for our leadership. And thanks again for stepping on the ride and giving us some insight into your life and what you're up to.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Thank you guys so much.
Recording stopped.